Everybody, we are coming to you live from Oaxaca. This is MexElects Saturday morning live from Oaxaca. We've got a little different format, as you can see, obviously, in terms of our news reviews section that we do every week. We've got 2 or 3 stories to talk about, and then we're going to take questions from you all. So we're going to start with probably the biggest story across all 3 borders.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, thanks Colin, and welcome everyone to our maiden live broadcast. We hope you enjoy it and find it very informative, entertaining, and the like. We're going to do it both in English and Spanish because we have viewers from both languages here. Vamos a intentar hacer esta transmisión hoy tanto en inglés como en español. Y si hay preguntas, pueden hacerlas en ambos idiomas. So, the first news story that has to be covered is Donald Trump's decision to militarize the border with Mexico. Trump was down over Easter weekend at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. He was down with his, his advisors and some Fox News buddies, and they got the bad news that Ann Coulter had said that Trump isn't being tough enough on immigration. Which, of course, in true Trumpian style, he got on his Twitter and started tweeting out a series of messages that the border is unsafe, and Obama, and Democrats, and drugs coming through. And then he found out that this caravan of people, the Via Crucis, was coming up from Honduras, and this had to be stopped. So when you get all this bluster aside, I mean, we're really looking at a situation where the border is not currently a problem. Border crossings are at the lowest they've been in a generation. Border arrests are at the lowest they've been in a long time. And the number of immigrants in the United States actually right now is stable. There's actually as many leaving as coming in. And so he's created as usual, a non-problem here in a world of other more serious problems. So he decided to announce on Tuesday that he was going to send the National Guard to the border. And it's funny that just that same Easter Sunday, when Trump started sending off his series of tweet rants, López Obrador launched his campaign right there at the border in Ciudad Juárez with some very marked words, saying, we're going to be very respectful of the United States, but we're also not going to let Mexicans be disrespected, and Mexico is not going to be the piñata of any foreign government. Something that he's been repeating in his appearances in the north and along the border throughout the week. Peña Nieto, his government was initially slow to respond, which is not surprising, considering how his government has handled Trump over these several years. Although on Thursday night he did make a nationally televised appearance and gave a well-received, to be honest, speech, again defending Mexican dignity, defending a diplomatic way of resolving problems, rejecting the militarization of the border, and also quoting all of the presidential candidates in his speech, which is kind of a very rare show of unity, however calculated it might have been, in this very polarized times, in this very polarized race. He quoted each of the presidential candidates in order, saying we are all in agreement on this. So in one point of view, you could say that it took Donald Trump to unite Mexico, or to unite the candidates. Of course, you can't deny that Peña Nieto's speech had an electoral subtext. He was saying, our administration has done this, our administration has done that. So there was enough of his own back padding there to do it. And the question also could be asked, why is he doing it now? Why so late in the game? Why wasn't he doing it back in the campaign in 2016 when Trump was calling Mexicans rapists? Why did he invite candidate Trump to Mexico? Right? That was Videgaray's great bumble there to legitimize Trump on the foreign stage and to legitimize Trump on the Latin stage right when he'd said all these terrible things about Mexicans. Why has he been so quiet this whole time when Trump has continued this rhetoric on and off this whole time? So a well-received speech, but one that came very late in the game, and when the campaigns are just getting started, it's clearly trying to position the PRI again as this old nationalist PRI that stands up for Mexico, which it really hasn't. Really hasn't been doing.
And let it not be forgotten, of course, that Peña Nieto doesn't have a lot of cred on this particular issue since he has militarized policing in Mexico on his side of the border.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the next story is kind of a local one, but many people internationally will know the context. The ombudsman for Oaxaca, Arturo Piembert, just 2 days ago declared that he was taking to the International Criminal Court in The Hague the case surrounding the scores of deaths. In fact, between 2006 and 2016, 103 extrajudicial killings. Many of these were connected with two sort of bookending events. The uprising of 2006, which has seen no one come to trial for the extrajudicial killings around that event, not to mention the hundreds of people injured, manning barricades and that sort of thing during the events of the Oaxacan uprising of 2006, and the events in 2016 in Nochixtlan, where 8 teachers and their supporters were killed on a barricade there. Apparently, the ombudsman has simply gone through the files that have been sitting there, documenting those responsible, but nothing was done about it. The old story of complete and utter impunity on the part of the state and its military and police agencies when it comes to extrajudicial killings. So that's a big step forward, actually, and that should bring this story right out into the mainstream media once again, because the case wants to take Ulises Ruiz Ortiz, who was governor at the time, who has never come to trial on any of these charges, before the International Criminal Court. It'll be a test of both of the claims against Ulises Ruiz, and also a test for the International Criminal Court itself.
This is a big for everybody who lived in Oaxaca, for everybody who experienced 2006, when the movement, in June, when the state police tried to wipe the teachers' strike, clear them out of the center, and the teachers took back the center. From that day, there was a series of terrible extrajudicial, that same day, state police were committing human rights violations. They were shooting down, tear gas cylinders from helicopters, and then they started going underground. You'd see state police without uniforms. They took the license plates off their trucks and just started terrorizing these neighborhoods of Oaxaca through the night. And then, through several months, when it came to November, when the federal police were sent down, this was President-elect Felipe Calderon's first attempt to show that he was tough, that he was going to take office despite the electoral fraud, and show that he, was a tough guy. That November 25th, there was a whole series there of people were just rounded up and arrested and sent off to maximum security prison in Nayarit. All of this was shelved. There was hope that when Gabino Cue was elected governor several years later, this was the first time the PRI had lost Oaxaca State since ever, since the PRI had been founded, that there was going to be some kind of justice in that regard, and Cue shelved it all. This was the PAN PRD government. Cue did not follow this up. So just like many people thought that hopefully that Obama would prosecute some of the Bush-era crimes and some of the banking stuff that he let go, Cue here at the state level let a terrible record of impunity go by in order to try to kind of establish deals with the PRI once in power. So this is a very bold move that the ombudsman dusted off those files and found that the state government knew all along what had happened. And they had files on what had happened all along on who had been killed. Remember, this wasn't just Oaxacans. There was Brad Will, the American indie media journalist who was killed in October of 2006. There was a Finnish journalist who was killed up towards the Triki area. It's an international story that was shelved with a lot of complicity on all sides. And if this goes to the international level, you know, it's 12 years later. Will some, you know, breadcrumbs of justice come for this, for all the families who suffered? That would be something at least.
Yeah. Well, violence, impunity, impunity, and violence.
Yeah.
The next story is related to a blog we put up just last night on Canadian mining companies in Mexico, well, throughout Latin America, but principally Mexico. And if this doesn't chill your soul, I don't know what would. I mean, you know, it's just so beyond the pale that it's in some senses just hard to absorb. Report came out last year, an excellent report, very balanced, judicious report in Canada called Canada's Brand of Violence, Canadian Mining Companies in Latin America. The links to that are in the blog, where they document 44 deaths in Latin America. These are not just accidental deaths, these are targeted assassinations of anti-mining activists across a range of countries in Latin America, detentions, sexual violence on absolutely mind-boggling scale. In Mexico, the story gets even more terrible in its dimensions. A recent book by a Mexican journalist called México Abierto Cielo.
México a cielo abierto.
A cielo abierto, literally open pit.
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
And the really shocking documentation in this book really has to become known to Canadians, and I hope that book will be translated into English, or a Canadian publisher may take it up. He documents 951 regions in the country where mainly Canadian mining companies, because 65% of all mining companies in Mexico are Canadian-based, are in open collaboration with narco-traficante gangs, cartels, as enforcers to take care of any anti-mining activity by local communities who feel that their lands are being despoiled, their aquifers and rivers and streams are being contaminated by the mining of gold and silver and other minerals in Mexico. Case after case, in forensic detail, these incidents are being documented. So this in a sense is a huge story, but it's a very old story. We Canadians tend to be utterly naive about the activities of Canadian mining companies throughout Latin America, but particularly in Mexico. And it's really time to wake up to just the horrific scale of the violence and the systematic nature of the violence. That's it. It's not just random violence. It's this systematic, planned violence, so much so that one Canadian executive on business television, of all places in Canada, a year or so ago, openly admitted his collaboration with narco cartels, drug cartels in the northern part of Mexico, and said, yeah, we give them a call. They say, oh, no, don't go there until we're done. But they call us back and say, yeah, okay, you can go in and explore there. Everything's been taken care of. I mean, this is just unbelievable stuff. And as I say, it's a good wake-up call for Canadians, because Canadians, quite frankly, can be pretty smug at times and self-righteous that they are not as terrible as the Americans, especially when you have a regime, as we discussed earlier, like the Trump regime. But sorry, folks, I'm afraid we do.
That's really the most extraordinary part of this whole story to me, this chummy nature between the mining directors and the drug cartels. Just pick up the phone, hey, can I go in and exploit? No, wait, we're doing our own exploiting. Then when you're done, when we're done, we'll let you know you can go in and you do your thing.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, that's just
We'll tell you where not to dig because there might be, some corpses there.
Yeah,
but
I don't know why I always wind up using the Italian mafia voice, like across the board for all these people, because it's
Yeah.
it's the one I just pull out of my pocket.
True.
But it's shocking and it's damning. And as you'd pointed out before, these mining companies are experts in doing this because people ask, why is it the Canadian mining companies? Why is it not the Americans? There are also American mining companies. Why isn't it the Dutch or the French or the Germans? And as you pointed out, the Canadians have become experts at exploiting their own indigenous people for mining resources.
Well, exactly. 40% of mining companies in the world are based in Canada. And Canada has a long history with its own indigenous people as a sort of training ground for its operations in the rest of the world, in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and so forth, of exploiting the lands and resources of indigenous people in Canada. And to see it in those terms is I think, quite telling, because this is literally kind of where they cut their teeth on exploiting indigenous people lands and resources, and now have sallied forth into other parts of the world using exactly the same tactics. The sad thing about Mexico is, and it's not that different from Canada, the land law here allows companies to simply come in and literally expropriate communal lands, lands that have religious or ritual significance for indigenous populations, to cut down forests, to tear up lands that are being used to grow food, and start digging a mine. And there's nothing under Mexican law, even though there are international conventions which Canada and Mexico and most other states have assigned to respect indigenous rights. There's very little of it in reality on the ground or under the ground.
So you go in and you divide the communities between who
exactly.
wants progress, who wants jobs,
Yes.
and who doesn't. And so you set the community against itself. You tear up the social community. You set people against each other. People who are like, we want jobs, we want employment, we're desperate. And then people say, well, no, because they're going to exploit us and the environment and a lot of other things. And once that's all set up, a lot of these towns operate in the town meeting model, usos y costumbres. Then you're all set, right?
And that has been the classic strategy in Canada, sort of divide and rule. Those who are opposed to mining or to other sorts of excavation are vilified as anti-progress, Luddites. In fact, just down the road here in Oaxaca, in San Jose Progreso, there's been a battle royale being fought really between two sections of the community, one allied to the mine and one that is opposed to the mine. And one of the anti-mining leaders was assassinated in 2012. There's been continuing violence ongoing since then. And of course, the mining companies in this kind of situation, even though they've fomented it, laid the groundwork with it, can sort of step back and say, well, it's a local dispute after all. It really has nothing to do with us, even though they are the primary beneficiaries of these kinds of internecine disputes.
So you divide up the community. Right, and then the added ingredient here is organized crime, right? So it's not bad enough just to divide the community between people who want progress and who don't. As you were saying in the piece, the Zetas were going around in that town in Pueblo and saying, we're just checking this. That's the mafia voice again. Sorry, the Zetas do not speak like this. We're just checking to see if you're all right with the mine. Everything good with the mine?
Exactly. And in Guerrero, another Gold Corp, Canadian Mining Corporation operation in Guerrero, there's actual competition between two of the major cartels in the region to extort people in this sort of way, right? Keep your mouth shut, pay us some money, everything's going to be okay.
The mine. The mine's good for you, you're good for the mine.
You're good for the mine. The Guerreros Unidos, one of the cartels in competition, are directly implicated in the disappearance of the 43 students at Ayotzinapa in 2014.
Which is a real other element to the story, that right by Ayotzinapa is one of the world's biggest gold mines.
Right.
You know,
yes.
right down the street from that area. You know,
Yeah.
coincidence?
Yeah, exactly. And so, as they say, you know, everything is related to everything else, and in this case, it's really an appalling story, and should bring shame certainly on the Canadian government for doing very little about it. I point out in the blog that the Canadian government set up just this year a new watchdog, a kind of ombudsperson who will publish a report each year, but it's absolutely and completely extrajudicial. It has no powers to regulate the operations of Canadian multinationals operating outside the country, or to bring prosecutions against those corporations. So it's really kind of toothless, and most of those
A PR ploy.
It's a PR ploy, exactly.
And for anyone who's studied some of Latin American history, for example, if you read The Open Veins of Latin America, Eduardo Galeano, this is just sadly another chapter in a long history of exploitation by colonial and post-colonial powers of Latin American minerals, energy, reserves, resources of all kinds. So it's just, you know, you think things have changed, read Galeano, read what's going on with the mines, and you see there's an incredible and very sad continuity over these centuries in exactly how these things have been handled. And then you wonder why Latin America sees things in the world very differently from the way the U.S. and Canada do.
Yeah.
Why does Latin America see the Israel and Palestine conflict so different from the U.S. and Canada tend to? Why do they see other post-colonial struggles around the world so differently? Why do they perceive capitalism and economic models so differently? Well, look at the history and look what's still going on.
From the Spanish conquistadores to the Canadian mining companies, I mean, it really has to be called by its name. It's a form of neocolonialism and imperialism. These mining companies are paying a pittance in wages, about the equivalent of $10.50 a day to miners a day, not an hour.
And you said they're making like
750%, 750 times greater profit than they pay for the concessions to the Mexican government. So it is, you know, robbery by another name, but that's exactly what it is, and that's why, as I say in the blog, Canadians in many parts of Mexico are more reviled than Americans.
Yeah. So let's just do a very brief summary in Spanish, and then we've got some questions rolling in that we want to get to. Muy brevemente, para los hispanoparlantes, hemos hablado hasta ahora de tres grandes noticias. La noticia de Donald Trump de militarizar la frontera, cuando realmente no hay un problema en la frontera, en el sentido de que la migración está en un punto más bajo desde los años 70. El número de migrantes es más o menos los mismos están saliendo que entrando en Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, Trump, creando un problema donde no hay, está mandando la Guardia Nacional a la frontera. Este mismo domingo de Pascua, López Obrador lanzó su campaña justo en la frontera, diciendo que México no va a ser la piñata de ningún gobierno extranjero. El gobierno de Peña Nieto tardó para responder, dio un discurso televisado el jueves, que fue bien recibido, pero también esto hace surgir preguntas de por qué tardó tanto en defender a México, cuando Trump ha estado diciendo cosas racistas acerca de los mexicanos desde su campaña, incluso antes, que los mexicanos son violadores y una serie de disparates. Y también que Peña Nieto, a través de Luis Videgaray, invitó a candidato Trump a México durante la campaña, legitimizando a un candidato justo en el momento crítico de la campaña de ahí, ¿no? La segunda cosa que mencionamos hasta ahora es el ombudsman de Oaxaca, que quiere llevar los casos de 2006 hasta Nochistlán, a la Corte, ¿cuál es? La Corte Internacional Penal. Corte Internacional Penal, y ojalá que esto, que son archivos que el Estado de Oaxaca ya tenía, ¿no?, ahí archivados, él sacándolos a la luz otra vez, vaya a traer algo de justicia unos 12 años después para algunas familias de las víctimas de la violencia de Luis Ruiz Ortiz y otros en esos acontecimientos. y también un blog que acabamos de subir al sitio de MexElects en inglés acerca de las prácticas nefastas de las mineras canadienses en territorio mexicano. Un 65% de las empresas mineras en México son canadienses, y salió un reporte en Canadá el año pasado hablando de una serie de violaciones de derechos humanos practicados por esas empresas, incluyendo explotación laboral de entrada, asesinatos de activistas antimineras, detenciones ilegales, prácticas sexuales, no violaciones sexuales, y colusión con el crimen organizado y los narcotraficantes, como los Zetas, Guerreros Unidos, la familia michoacana. Entonces tenemos como una situación en donde las mineras canadienses están coludiendo con los peores elementos del crimen ahí, a manera como de seguridad privada. ¿No? ¿Podemos entrar aquí? No, estamos aquí todavía. Luego les decimos cuándo pueden entrar y empezar a llevar a cabo sus prácticas mineras. Justin Trudeau dijo que pues vamos a revisar eso, y pusieron como una comisión ahí para investigar lo que está pasando, pero esta comisión no tiene poderes legales en Canadá, entonces no puede realmente tomar medidas contra esas empresas. Entonces más bien es una práctica de relaciones públicas. So we've got you up to date in Spanish. We hope this kind of bilingual format is working. We've got some questions coming in. We want to get to some of those. We're going to start out with a kind of an initial question here from Raquel. Good morning, Raquel. How you doing? What are the differences between the U.S. and the Mexican political system? Well, that's a big one. ¿Cuáles son las diferencias entre el sistema estadounidense y mexicano? Kind of in basic terms, Mexico has a federal system with 32 states, and now Mexico City has the status of a state with its own constitution. Yeah. So it's a federal system with nominally, a separation of powers, like the United States. It was modeled on that. But there are some differences. This year is going to be the biggest election day in Mexican history, supposedly. Right. Because on July 1st, the election is going to be for president and for the entire Congress, the entire House, and the entire Senate. Right. So that's a big deal. The president is elected for 6 years, can't be reelected. The House is elected for 3 years. The last elections were in 2015. They cannot have consecutive terms. No reelection was the big revolution rallying cry. In the practice, this means that mostly these kind of established candidates bounce back and forth. Yeah. So they'll bounce between a term in the House and a term in the Senate and a term in the House and a term in the Senate. So theoretically there's no re-election, but in practice there really is. Yeah. Yeah. So the House is all up this year, and the Senate is 128 members, and they're all up this year because their 6 years are up from 2012. Kind of the big difference with the American system is that Mexico has proportional representation in part. Right. So it's a little bit complicated. The House has 500 seats, 300 of which are selected by regular individual districts, and 200 by proportional representation. Okay. No party can have more than 300 seats in total. Okay. So there's a cap on how big a majority can be. Yeah. And the Senate, just to complicate things slightly further, half of the seats are selected by states. Right. Each state gets 2 senators, like in the U.S. Another senator for each state is elected by first minority, so the party that comes in second place in each state gets 1 senator. So there's really 3 senators per state. Yeah. And then you get some proportional representation senators for nationally. Okay. So that's kind of the big difference there. There's proportional representation in part. There's public financing of campaigns, although, as we talked about in our journalists' roundtable the other day, there's a problem with that because it's an excessive amount of money that has made kind of the Mexican public turn against what is, in theory, a very good system of public financing, and that doesn't stop candidates from getting private financing either illicitly. And those are kind of the big differences to cover there.
So, perhaps a naive question. Yeah. I mean, could you have a scenario where López Obrador, for example, is elected, which polls suggest he might be, and then a Congress and Senate which are wholly against him, or at least wholly enough against him in terms of their numbers to completely stymie and place roadblocks in front of his agenda?
Yeah, that's a very likely scenario, actually. López Obrador is very much ahead in the polls at the presidential level, and it remains to be seen how big his coattails are, which in Spanish is called el efecto López Obrador. And he does have coattails. He's shown that in 2006 and 2012. But let us recall that Morena is a very new party. It was formed just after the elections in 2012. It doesn't have a national organization to the extent that the PRI and the PAN, who've been around since the 20s and 30s, have. So it's going to be very difficult for López Obrador to get a majority in both houses.
Yes.
And it's funny that his first campaign video, one of his first ones he put out was, don't just vote for me, but vote for our candidates, the Morena candidates at the state and local level. Remember that Morena is in coalition with the Workers' Party, which ideologically makes sense, and the PES, right? This
not so much.
which doesn't make sense, you know, the Social Encounter Party, and they each have quotas. So the Workers' Party gets a quota of the candidacies, and the PES, the Social Encounter Party, gets a quota of the candidacies. And the problem is, as we talked about, if you do speak Spanish, please watch our Journalists Roundtable that we just put up a couple days ago. The problem is, and this is an endemic problem in Mexico, candidates jumping parties.
Yeah.
So Morena, a lot of candidates, seeing that Morena is likely to win, are jumping in and grabbing candidacies from the PRI, from the PAN, from Movimiento Ciudadano, from a bunch of other parties, people that do not share the same ideological convictions of López Obrador or the average Morena voter.
Yeah.
So you have kind of this elite of people who just go and find the party they need to get the candidacy for.
Yeah.
So there's two problems. One, that López Obrador might not get a majority in Congress, although if he wins by a large margin, it is possible. And secondly, even if he does, who is actually being elected?
Yeah, right.
Who are some of these people? But there are some very good Morena candidates this year,
yeah.
and there are also some not so good Morena candidates there that are not ideological progressives by any stretch of the imagination.
And this has caused considerable debate between loosely the left and the right within Morena over the acceptance of these kind of Johnny-come-lately kind of candidates, right, hopping on board.
Yeah.
Now
we can understand that all progressive parties are a broad tent.
Yeah.
I mean, in the British Labour Party, you have anything from Blairites to Corbynites, and the American Democratic Party, you have anything from Clintonites, neoliberal Clintonites, to Bernieites.
Yeah.
So that's understandable. The problem is these candidacies are being stacked up by professional lifetime politicians, a lot of them who belong to the same families, whose names have been recycled over and over again, and who are just looking to get on the public payroll, stay in a cushy public position, and in certain cases to have the immunity that comes with being the immunity from prosecution that comes from being a deputy or senator. So we've got a couple other questions coming in here. Here's a good one. This is actually a very interesting one. This is from Esteban López. Good morning, Esteban. ¿Por qué creen que las candidaturas de Mid y Anaya no se están despegando, tomando en cuenta que tienen el apoyo de los intereses pues, de los grandes mediáticos y económicos? That's an excellent question. The question is, why do you think Meade and Anaya's candidacies are not taking off if they have the support being right-wing candidates, if they have the support of the major media outlets and certainly financial interests in the country?
Right. That's a very good question. I mean, so far, I think, and this seems to be the understanding of a lot of people, is that there's still a contest on between Meade, Meade, and Anaya, who's going to be the second place candidate. Once that is clear, Anaya still could, for example, go down in flames around this money laundering operation that he's been accused of. Or Meade, who's in third place, could continue to tank. And then, you have a single clear candidate standing, and that's when everybody piles on the PRI and PAN in their historic informal
Right.
alliance
Right.
to sort of trade off governance, and
Right.
everybody piles in behind them, as do the media duopoly as well. So I think that's a huge factor still, because I mean we're at the beginning, 3 months out from actual election day.
So I think it's a very, very important point, what Colin just said. And just to add to that, their campaigns haven't been good so far, and they both have what's called una cola que le pisa in Spanish. They say they both got a track record of things behind them.
Yeah.
Meade has the legacy of Peña Nieto's lackluster economic record behind him,
Right.
And he was the finance secretary. He was been the finance secretary there. So during this years of very weak growth, 2%. I just read an article today in Proceso that said the Peña Nieto government is second only to Calderon's in worst economic performance since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Just slightly ahead of Calderon's. And remember, Calderon had the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
Which Peña Nieto didn't have,
Yeah.
and even then they're about the same, about 2% in a country where population growth is still at that level. He's got the gasolinazos behind him, which is this drastic increase in gasoline prices.
Yeah.
He was the finance secretary. He's got all the corruption of the PRI, from Peña Nieto to all of these governors.
Yeah.
He was the finance secretary there. Why didn't he prosecute? And the Estafa Maestra, I see another question coming in about that, so we'll talk about that in a minute, which was a huge scandal of diversion of resources from two government agencies, the Serasol and the Sedatu. They began under Rosario Robles, but he was the successor, and Sedatu, this development secretariat, and did he not see?
Yeah.
I thought he's a finance guru with advanced degrees from Yale. Why didn't he see this? So people are aware of this, and that's dragging him down. And plus the fact that he's simply just not a charismatic candidate. He's a technocrat. He's a bland speaker. And bizarrely, I think this is the most bizarre thing to me, Meade has decided to focus his campaign on corruption. Why do that? If you're running from the PRI, don't talk about corruption. Talk about anything else. Who are his handlers? Talk about economic development projects, whatever else. But don't focus on corruption, because that's the one thing everybody associates with the PRI. Every time you mention it, people associate it with you again. He came out with his first spot saying, "I'm not corrupt. I'm honest. I don't steal." It sounds kind of psychologically lapsing there. So that's Meade for one hand. Anaya is also not taking off because of his huge scandal that broke about the triangulation of resources and money laundering, this inexplicable enrichment that he supposedly put a nave industrial, an industrial building, on a piece of land to make it to make it more valuable, and then he flipped it and sold it. Some of the companies involved were fictitious companies. Kind of the same thing people associate with politicians. This idea of getting into office for your own enrichment, or jumping parties to continue to enrich yourself, as we were just talking about. So Anaya's got this embroiled in him. And of course he's cried martyr, but the problem is, it's very likely that the PRI government is going after him for political purposes, but that doesn't discount the fact that it's true. There are very clear evidence that he did do it. And so that's dragging him down. And I think the other factor with Anaya is he's kind of giving this impression of trying to run for CEO of a company. Using dynamic enterprise kind of kind of business speak. Make yourself better and all this kind of stuff. And for a white guy who lives in Atlanta, who spends more time in the U.S. than I do, that's not communicating to the large mass of Mexican people. Who don't see Mexico as a big company where they're all shareholders and going together on this great road of prosperity. So he hasn't yet found any kind of common touch. He's young, he's 38, and I think an important thing to point out with Anaya is he's never won elective office. He's never won elective office. Remember that Mexico has proportional representation. So if you get high up on the PR lists, you're guaranteed a seat. You don't have to campaign. That's how he got to the House of Representatives. He's never actually had to run and win a campaign, and it shows. His and Meade's candidacies are not, are not being run well to date. And say what you will about AMLO, but he's done this twice before. He knows the game.
He
knows how to run for president and is doing it well so far.
Yeah. And, I mean, just a general point on both of them, I think, you know, as someone who's been coming to Mexico for 15 or 16 years, I have never felt such a level of general piss-offedness as one feels now, just talking to ordinary people.
Right.
It's as though the game is up in terms of people's being fed up with corruption, violence, impunity,
it's gotten
insecurity.
So bad.
All of that has this accumulative effect that people are just not buying it. So much so that, you know, I gather that within the inner sanctums of the PRI and PAN, operatives are worried that people will take the old bribes. You know, here's a Soriana card, go buy, you know, $25 worth of groceries and vote in a completely opposite direction.
Yeah, right. Take the bribes. It's your money anyway, and vote for who you want.
Exactly.
And that would change the whole nature of the system, because the whole nature of the Mexican corporate system is kind of block voting. We're going to get our block votes out there, and also vote buying, as the PRI did last election with the cards. And if people wise up, take the cards and vote for whoever they want, that game doesn't work anymore.
Exactly.
And that pulls the rug out from under them.
Yeah.
We've got a question, the Estafa Meister. I want to get to that in a second. We've got one here from Brian McDougall. Hi, Brian. The question is, there are two questions. Given López Obrador's lead in the polls, what signs are there the Mexican and American ruling classes are preparing to steal the election? And has AMLO's moderation made stealing the election unnecessary? Those are two excellent questions. We're going to translate those questions, and we'll try to get those in both languages. La pregunta es, dada la ventaja de López Obrador en las encuestas, ¿cuáles signos hay, si hay señales de que las clases de élite en Estados Unidos y México están preparando a robar la elección? Y también es el hecho que López Obrador ha moderado su discurso, que es innegable, ha hecho innecesario el robar la elección. So, it's funny, MexElects just posted in its Facebook page a couple of days ago a column from Julio Hernandez Lopez, from the Astillero columnist from the Jornada, and he said, maybe one reason why Peña Nieto has been so submissive to Trump all along the way, his speech Thursday night notwithstanding, which did have a degree of nationalist spark to it, is because he may very well need the Trump administration's support if it comes to perpetrating another election fraud down the line. Because AMLO is way ahead now, but you can never count out the ruling class here. AMLO has been way ahead before, and they're very good at creating fictitious polls, you know, just to show kind of an artificial rise of one candidate, whichever one the elite decides to choose. It could be Anaya, it could be Meade. So, you know, polls are always very massageable depending on the polling sample you use, depending on whether you have a polling sample of more older people or younger people. In 2012, the Millennial newspaper had polls daily showing Peña Nieto with some enormous, unbeatable lead, and that had a lot to do with creating the perception that he was of his inevitability. So nothing can be counted out there. Remember, Honduras, you know, a much smaller country given, has gone through a fraudulent election, which the Trump administration rubber stamped. So I think nothing can be counted out, and once the PRI and the PAN figure out who the candidate of the elite is going to be, there's still kind of internecine warfare there, they will put everything behind one candidate. And it's very likely that Margarita Zavala, the independent candidate, Felipe Calderón's wife, very likely will drop out at some point in order to try to sell her support to the candidate who appears to be leading. It should be noted that former PAN president Vicente Fox is supporting the PRI this year. So, you know, this is the way the elite work. They find their person.
And there's no question that the Americans are paying very close attention. I mean, we've been served up, you know, 6 or 8 months of stalled NAFTA negotiations,
Exactly
right?
right.
With the Americans saying we're going to pull out, Trump even still tweeting
just recently
this sort of nonsense. But the reality is they've made it clear they're rushing toward an April 15th agreement.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're very and deeply concerned about the outcome of the Mexican election. If NAFTA remains a political football during the election, that will play towards
for a future democracy opening in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right, back in the 90s it was still a one-party state, so they said, well, the society is evolving, there may have to be an opening coming up, let's lock in NAFTA. Remember, NAFTA in Mexico is a treaty. It's not just an agreement passed by a majority like in the States, it's called a treaty. So the idea is to lock in, or as we saw in our interview with Richard Roman, to constitutionalize these reforms, to make them, you can't walk them back, right? So you've gotten to the point now where AMLO is in favor of NAFTA, and I think this speaks to Brian's second question, has AMLO's moderation made stealing the election unnecessary? There's no doubt that AMLO has moderated. I think at his heart, he's still a fiery progressive, but kind of coached now to be very careful. He's using very ambiguous language on a lot of things, to the point where it's frustrating. He won't come out right and say that we're going to cancel the privatization of Pemex, the energy reform. He says, well, we're going to revise the contracts, we're going to submit it to a referendum. He won't come out right and say we're going to go against NAFTA. He's in support of NAFTA, but with renegotiations. And he wants to be in on those renegotiations, which is where they're trying to rush to get them over.
Victory. All he has to do now is reassure the financial and business, big business sectors, say nice things to them, and everything will be okay. Which, of course, from this our lights, is kind of a kiss of death when someone like Moody's is extolling. You'll do okay. Just don't screw around too much with the financial sector and big business interests, and all indicators are that AMLO has been making those reassurances. I mean, just the other day, in a major interview in La Jornada, he said, "Don't worry, nobody's going to be expropriated. Even if we don't build the airport, everybody will be compensated. Don't worry about renationalization of Pemex. Everybody will get their money." These sorts of indicators are that the financial community and big business are coming to the reality of an AMLO government, and it's not going to be all that worrisome
for them, which is indicative. And I think if you want to really be cynical, and it's kind of hard not to be, you could say that the elites have kind of gotten what they wanted. They've postponed a López Obrador government 12 years. He first ran in 2006. He then ran again in 2012. There was all kinds of machinations and fraud involved in these elections. So if he wins this time, they've managed to postpone an AMLO government 12 years, and they managed to slip in the privatization of Pemex. It's been 12 more years of a neoliberal model that's kind of been all that more locked in, and they've got things in place that makes it all that much harder for him to walk them back afterwards. So it's like, all right, you can win now.
But, the big unknown is there are still lots of people, literally millions of people, lined up behind AMLO who think that AMLO is going to do something serious about all of the serious problems besetting Mexico. And that's really a wild card in anything, because expectations will rise astronomically with an AMLO victory, and that could spark all kinds of kind of extra electoral movements and struggles that AMLO simply can't control.
That's right.
And of course, that's the ultimate middle of the night nightmare of big business and the financial sector, is that that's what will happen. That movements will simply move out around the electoral system and the newly elected AMLO government, and all hell will break loose. And nobody can predict that. And that's
just a brief summary in Spanish. Lo que estamos diciendo, ya posteamos en MexElects una columna de Julio Hernández López de la jornada que sugirió, nomás una idea, que este servilismo de Peña Nieto ante Trump tiene un propósito de que si intentan perpetrar un fraude electoral en esta elección, que puedan contar con el apoyo de Estados Unidos en eso, si es que esto llegara a pasar, ¿no? Esto, no obstante, el discurso medianamente fuerte que dio Peña Nieto el jueves, ¿no? Acabamos de ver una elección robada en Honduras,
Sí.
¿no? Con el apoyo
Claro.
de Estados Unidos, entonces nada está fuera de la posibilidad. AMLO tiene una amplia ventaja ahora, pero hemos visto en situaciones anteriores cómo pueden masajear o cucharear a las encuestas para mostrar que haya como ese tipo de tendencia artificial a la alza de un candidato. Puede ser mucho con las encuestas, ¿no?
Sí.
Puedes tomar más viejos que jóvenes, puedes cambiar las regiones donde haces más preguntas. Las encuestas son infinitamente manipulables, ¿no? Lo vimos en 2012 con estas encuestas diarias en Milenio, que daba una artificial y muy falsa ventaja de Peña Nieto de unos 20 puntos o cosas así, ¿no? Entonces, cuando se decide quién va a ser el candidato de la élite, se va a hacer Meade o se va a hacer Anaya, la élite se va a unir atrás de ese candidato y es muy probable que Margarita Zavala se decline para vender sus votos y su apoyo a uno de los dos candidatos. Entonces, esto está lejos de decidirse, ¿no? En cuanto a la moderación de AMLO, hemos visto sí un AMLO más moderado, no ha hablado de volver a expropiar a Pemex o echar atrás la reforma energética, ha sido muy cautelosa con eso. Sí. Hay muchos intereses internacionales muy fuertes en juego, sí. No, ya hay contratos de Shell Oil y de los petroleros del Medio Oriente, entonces, ¿no? Es decir, por eso se han llevado a cabo golpes de Estado en todo el mundo por el asunto petrolero, sí. ¿No? Entonces, uno entiende hasta cierto punto su caución ahí. También AMLO está a favor del TLC, aunque esté queriendo renegociarlo, y por eso tienen tanta premura de cerrar las negociaciones del TLC antes de la elección, a ver si lo van a poder hacer. Pero realmente AMLO nunca ha sido tan de izquierda como algunos temen o algunos desean. Siempre ha sido desde 2006 un candidato de centro izquierda, muy en el molde de Keynes, muy en este modelo de usar el gobierno para estimular la inversión privada, usar el dinero que se rescata de la corrupción para el desarrollo del país. En temas sociales no es particularmente progresista, pero un gobierno de AMLO sí representaría un gran, aunque no es tan de la izquierda como muchos creen, aún así representaría un enorme desafío a los intereses, por ejemplo, de la agricultura estadounidense, sí. ¿No? Ahora México ha abandonado el campo, importa mucha comida, sí. ¿No? El hecho de que quiere que México sea más autónomo en cuanto a la producción de alimentos es un desafío a intereses internacionales. El hecho de que quiere construir más refinerías y decir que México haga sus propias gasolinas, ahora importa un 75% de las sí. gasolinas de Estados Unidos. Esto representa un gran desafío a Estados Unidos y también a los élites mexicanos que hacen un gran negocio de importar gasolinas. Quiere cancelar el aeropuerto, que yo veo bien, ¿no? Lleno de corrupción y en el lugar equivocado. Ahí te va a tener que ir contra intereses bien establecidos. Entonces uno entiende también, ¿no? Yo quisiera que fuera más progresista en muchas cosas, pero aun con lo que quiere hacer va a estar enfrentando una gama muy amplia de intereses y poderes sí. fácticos. Sí. So we've got one more question here. How we doing? Yeah? Liking it so far? Good. What is the estafa maestra that I've been hearing so much about? This is from Jennifer. Didn't put her last name. Hi, Jennifer. What is the estafa maestra? The estafa maestra means master scam. Right. The master scam. It's like Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
And this was a revelation that just came out recently it was broken by the great news site Animal Politico
Sí.
in conjunction with the organization Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity. And it was a revelation that the federal government under Peña Nieto has been diverting resources. They found up to 7 billion pesos, but the total could be up to some 31 billion pesos. Diverting resources through public universities in a series of different federal government agencies. One of them is Banobras, the National Bank of Public Works, whose head was Alfredo Mazo, who then was elected in a very fraudulent election governor of the state of Mexico. These names keep recycling around. So one is Banobras. Another is Pemex, speaking of Pemex, with Emilio Lozoya, who was head of Pemex and was also involved in the Odebrecht corruption scandal, the Brazilian company who was involved in bribing all kinds of governments in Latin America. Lozoya is under the gun for that when he was involved in Peña Nieto's campaign in 2012. And these development organizations, Sedatu and Sedesol, who were headed up by Rosario Robles and then Jose Antonio Meade after that.
Right.
What they would do is, this is kind of a long-standing practice that you, in government, give contracts to either governments that are your cronies,
Yeah.
right, or non-existent companies,
Right.
and you just pocket the money.
Yeah.
This is what Javier Duarte did, the former
Right.
governor
Yeah.
Javier Duarte,
Veracruz.
who was on the lam, Veracruz. This was a little bit more sophisticated. The master scam here is they would funnel money through public universities, right, who would take a cut,
Yeah.
and then those universities would then supposedly hire organizations to provide services or provide some kind of project, which in many cases never was delivered.
Right.
So it's a money laundering because
Yeah.
you're giving the money to a legitimate
Yeah.
institution, which is
Right.
the public university, in order for them to then contract out something which you
Yeah.
couldn't contract directly for, and the money gets lost along
In-
the way.
In process.
In typical style, nobody has been punished for this. Absolute impunity again. But at least the story was broken by Animal Politico based on a report from the Federal Audit Office, which did do its job on
Yeah,
this. And then Animal Politico went in and kind of checked all the documents and
Yeah.
found where all the money had gone. We posted, it's in Spanish, we posted a link to the big Animal Politico report on this. And this is just another millstone around Meade's neck.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
around the PRI government's neck in general.
Right.
Right?
Right. But it does demonstrate an amazing facility for corruption,
Yeah.
which, you know, a lot of people, I think, in the back of their mind are saying, if you can pull off a scam on this scale,
Yeah.
at this level of sophistication, surely you can fix an election.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think the other problem is for people who are progressive-minded, one would like to see a campaign more ideologically based.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No kidding.
One would love for López Obrador and Morena to be really forming a progressive movement that isn't just personal, it isn't just based on AMLO. I think one of the problems with Morena is it's a personal vehicle for AMLO to be elected. And all credit to him. He formed a party, and in 6 years, it may very well win the presidency, which in Mexican terms is unheard of. So that's a huge feat.
Yeah.
But it's a personal vehicle.
Yeah.
We don't see from Morena a real established ideology, and it's because this topic of just rampant corruption is using up all the oxygen in the room.
Yeah.
And saying, let's just get rid of corruption.
Yeah.
And so what's not being talked about is, why does this current economic and political model foster corruption?
Yeah.
Although AMLO does discuss that, you know, some. This
Yeah.
idea of the privatization mania has led to a huge degree
Yeah.
of corruption in,
Yeah.
you know, privatizing companies. But there hasn't been the formation of really kind of an ideological movement behind that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That could last beyond the López Obrador
Yeah,
government.
yeah, and another point is related to that is that, like the history of social democracy the world over,
Yeah.
everything gets placed in the electoral basket,
Right.
and the kinds of movements that you need on the ground to push forward a progressive
Yeah.
agenda. They have all the energy sucked out of them into
Exactly.
the electoral campaign,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a classic pattern that repeats itself over, and unfortunately with Morena being such a vehicle for López Obrador, you could be forgiven for asking, well, what's left for the activists who are supporting López Obrador?
And, that speaks to a lot of the movements that are out there, everything from the Zapatista movement to the National Indigenous Council, to those supporting Marichuy, to the teachers, to even these local self-defense organizations that have sprung up to protect their areas against drug trafficking in the absolute absence and collusion of the federal governments. One of the heads of Mireles of the self-defense movement was in jail, was jailed for many years. What's going to happen to all this? That's a big question going forward. Entonces, no creo que tengo que decir mucho en español acerca de la estafa maestra. Creo que muchos mexicanos ya saben qué es. Es la revelación de esta investigación del sitio Animal Político y la Organización México en contra de la corrupción y la impunidad, del desvío de recursos del gobierno de Peña Nieto en las instancias de Banobras con Del Mazo, en Sedato y Sedasol con Rosario Robles, en el Pemex con Emilio Lozoya. Unos 7,000 millones de pesos, podría subir hasta 31,000 millones de pesos. Tomaban ese dinero y lo lavaba a través de instituciones públicas, universidades públicas, para luego llegar a contratos para productos y servicios que en muchos casos nunca llegaron a darse, con total impunidad. Esto obviamente va a pesar muy fuertemente en contra de Meade, porque él, antes era secretario de Finanzas y luego fue el sucesor de Rosario Robles en Sedasol. Sí, ¿no? So I think that's about it for today. We don't want to extend too much in our first live stream. We hope you've enjoyed this. Please send us, if you didn't have a chance to see this live, we're going to post this video in our YouTube channel so you can see the whole thing again, or if you liked it, you can see it all again afterwards. Send us your questions, send us your comments, participate. We had some great questions today. We hope to have some more next time. And we'll be back again with another episode of MexElects Live.
Saturday morning live on MexElects.